Welcome to this episode of In Conversation with Yuval Sharon and Megan Steigerwald Ille. Yuval Sharon is the newly appointed Gary L. Wasserman Artistic Director of Michigan Opera Theater. Described by the New York Times as an opera disruptor, Yuval has been creating an unconventional body of work that seeks to expand the operatic form. Yuval founded and serves as artistic director of The Industry in Los Angeles, a company devoted to new and experimental opera that has brought opera into moving vehicles, operating in train stations, Hollywood sound stages, and various non-spaces such as warehouses, parking lots, and escalator corridors. His production of John Adams' Dr. Atomic received the 2014 Goetz Friedrich Prize in Germany. He produced the first fully staged opera ever presented at Vienna's Musikverein, and in 2018, Sharon became the first American director of the Bayreuth Festival with his production of Lohengrin. Sharon has been honored with a MacArthur Fellowship and a Foundation of Contemporary Art grant for theater. Our special guest interviewer is Megan Steigerwald Ille, who is the Assistant Professor of Musicology at the College Conservatory of Music at the University of Cincinnati. Her research on the 21st century U.S. American opera industry considers the intersections of operatic, popular, and digital cultures. She has articles forthcoming in the Journal of the Society for American Music and the Opera Quarterly. Her monograph in progress, Opera for Everyone, Experimenting with American Opera in the Digital Age, is an ethnographic study of the experimental opera company, The Industry. We wish to thank the Ford Motor Company Fund and the National Endowment for the Humanities for their continued support of MOT at Home, and hope you'll now enjoy this conversation with Yuval Sharon and Megan Steigerwald Ille.
Hi, Yuval. As always, it's a real pleasure to get to have a conversation about your work and more broadly to think about opera and spectatorship together. I thought it might be kind of nice to start by thinking really broadly about the operatic genre, and especially that's kind of because you're someone who has feet in both worlds, creating strong work in both experimental and historical kinds of spaces. And so The first thing I wanted to start with was, I was curious, do you see your more experimental modes of directing and producing opera in dialogue with your work with companies that have historically produced more traditional material? How do the two kind of come together?
Yeah, I think that's such a great question, because sometimes people ask me, you seem to have these two distinct lives that you're pursuing. The work that's done in Los Angeles, which is, experimental, site-specific, brand new operas, works that really try to expand the definition of what opera is, in every single way. And then doing things like Lohengrin or Magic Flute, Valkyrie, all of these kind of pieces in Germany. And, in conventional theaters, So, to me, maybe from the outside, it might look a little bit split. But I do think that the two strands of my own creative life feel very connected to what opera really is. Opera has so many different directions that it can go. We sometimes make the mistake of thinking of opera as a monolithic thing. Like opera is always what was designated in 19th century Italy as opera, and that's what it remains. But actually, opera has so many different facets and so many different characteristics, and I think at the core, it is about that meeting of the different arts, which mean it should be different everywhere. And so I like to think about maybe more conventional repertoire versus experimental, new, site-specific repertoire as being in total dialogue. I don't think I could have come up with something like Hopscotch in Los Angeles without being a deep lover of Wagner's work and his idea of the Gesamtkunstwerk. Like, to me, those feel totally, totally connected, And even some of the maybe smaller scale projects seem hard to imagine without understanding how Monteverdi originally created operas, in this way that did feel like they were inventing a genre from all of the different people that came together. So I think then, you go back and then you listen to Monteverdi, with a new lens, you know? So it actually works in both ways, you know? The newer works really illuminate these classic works in a way that feels so important, and make them feel so essential for our own understanding of ourselves.
Yeah, I love that. You know, there's a scholar named Eric Drott, a music theorist, who writes about how genre is kind of this process of performance and reperformance and inscription and reinscription, almost like a conversation.
Yeah.
So I love that, because I feel like what you're saying really echoes that kind of way in which we experience genre, and then maybe we see a conventional work with new eyes, or we see a work like Hopscotch through this kind of Wagnerian lens even.
Yeah,
That's
you
really
know,
neat.
I really thought about this maybe for the first time in going to, you know, I went to see two performances back to back. One of Britten, Gloriana,
Uh-huh.
not really one of his strongest pieces, I think, but fascinating, and has a lot of very, very interesting. But there was so much Purcell in it, and then the next day there was a performance of the Fairy Queen, and like I heard it completely different than I've ever heard it before because of the Britain. You know, I don't know the exact length of time between those two pieces, but certainly a couple, couple centuries. You know, and thinking about that and realizing that the more that we create new pieces, the more we'll hear these old pieces in new ways.
Yeah.
It doesn't make them less relevant. It doesn't make them any less worth performing. It actually allows them to continue to thrive and continue to feel like they have something to say.
Yeah, that's so exciting. I mean, I think about the first time I started kind of seeing your production of Invisible Cities that you produced with the industry in Los Angeles. I remember the first time I kind of started thinking and writing about that production from the perspective of the Gesamtkunstwerk, and thinking, oh, wow, wait, this is that moment where I'm wearing headphones and I'm kind of experiencing this sound world that maybe Wagner is even kind of arguing for in some of his writing around, like Parsifal, for example. So yeah,
Yeah.
that's really neat. What about,
Yeah. You
sorry.
know, I think maybe for people who don't know the term Gesamtkunstwerk, I feel like it might be worth taking a second
Yeah.
to break that down. So Wagner came up with this very big idea called Gesamtkunstwerk, which in German is a kind of portmanteau word, where it is basically total work of art, is kind of how it's often translated. And there was the notion when he was creating these pieces that everything had an equal value. You know, the visual, the poetry, the music, the architecture that it's being performed in, all of it was all of one piece. You know, and there wasn't any one favored medium over any other. So that was a 19th century concept that was really radical for the time. And I think that concept actually did feel like it carries through, as Alex Ross's new book really outlines so beautifully. It's an idea that has inspired visual arts ever since,
Yeah.
particularly early, 20th century modernist thinking, in literature, in film, in all of these genres. You hear people go back again and again to Wagner's idea of the total work of art. And I have been also very inspired by that notion of Gesamtkunstwerk, but I've been wondering how to make it less singular. There is something in it that can feel like it's Wagner who wrote the text, Wagner wrote the music, Wagner directed the first production of The Ring in Bayreuth, the theater that he built. It is a lot around a single soul creative vision.
Yeah.
And I have been exploring, certainly with my projects for the industry, and I think also the projects that I have in mind for MOT, and my general attitude about opera really is trying to realize that you can have this notion of the total work of art without having all of the kind of egomania and monolithic perspective that might seem to come with it. That you can have Gesamtkunstwerk and a heterogeneous approach to visuals, to music, to everything. That actually variety and diversity is not something that's contradictory to the notion of the complete work of art, but actually quite the opposite. That the more various that you explore things, perhaps the more unified the artwork can actually feel.
Exactly. I mean, that makes me think of, I was thinking about the kind of well-known nickname that you got when you were at the LA Phil, this idea of the disruptor in residence, if you will. And I'm thinking about what you're saying about what we can get from ruptures and disruptures, right? And I'm curious if maybe you can talk a little bit more about what it means to disrupt, especially maybe in the context of your new position, and maybe even more specifically with Twilight Gods.
Well, maybe I should put it this way. I was given that title somehow, in my 30s. I'm 40 now, so it's time for me to grow up a little bit, it's time to go from, disruption in the tech industry is not a negative thing. The disruption is meant to be something that we've always done. We've always followed this path. And now all of a sudden we're gonna look at what happens if we go that path and realize there was a better way to do things, or at least, another way to do things. I think that term, though, in technology can often have a kind of messianic approach, of like, it's always been done wrong and now it's going to be done right. So that's always rubbed me the wrong way with that term disruptor, because it carries with it, I think, some connotations that I'm not super crazy about, but nevertheless, I was appreciative of the title only in the sense that I do think that there is so much unexplored potential within the genre of what we call opera. And I do think it does involve doing things differently, and it involves looking at things differently. I think it can come from, and it must come from, a total love of the work, and a love of the music, and wanting the music to reach people in maybe some totally unexpected ways. And also then, of course, the inclusion of new voices and the expansion of who gets to tell these stories that we're telling. But and especially from the point of view of a composer and librettist, who's writing the stories, who's giving it the kind of soul that music gives to characters, and and how do we actually keep opening that up instead of feeling like we're going to limit it more and more to a canon, a very limited canon of works based on maybe popularity, it's so I think about that a lot now, and especially in my role for Detroit, I keep thinking that it's there's a curatorial aspect to what I'll be doing. I'll be directing myself, but I certainly won't be the only director. I would love to open up the field to who the MOT audience gets to hear from and gets to see, and I would love for the programs that I put together for MOT to actually try and capture that sense of the encyclopedic possibilities within opera. So there are some 19th century Italian pieces that I still really love. I'd love to see them in a new way. I'd love to give them a new, shed some new light on them. But I also want to make sure they have those kind of conversation partners, like I mentioned, between Britten and Purcell, that even a classic piece like La Boheme, how can we do that? How can we do that in a way that no one's seen before, And then how can we do a new piece that lets us listen to a classic like La Boheme in a brand new way, A piece like Carmen is so audacious in so many ways, but is so often just presented as a good classic blockbuster that people love to buy tickets to. So what are ways in which we can get at the kind of audacity of this piece? And part of that is in the production itself. And then part of that is also what we surround that piece with, so that we listen to that piece in brand new ways.
Yeah. So what I hear is, in a way, you're kind of arguing for this notion of like disrupting the disruption. So by kind of like turning this idea of a single auteur kind of on its head and saying like, let's bring heterogeneity to, and a diversity of voices and experiences to certain works, and also almost create like a portfolio of heterogeneity when we're thinking about different works, and many of those works being older works, and putting them into dialogue in the way that we kind of thought about at the beginning of this conversation. That's really exciting.
Yeah, thanks. Those are the plans, at least. So
what is it about Götterdämmerung that really captured your imagination for the type of site-specific production that we're going to be seeing in the next, I suppose, month?
Yeah, I wasn't sure what the piece was going to be. I actually started this entire project thinking about the parking center, and thinking, well, we can't be in the theater, but we could completely follow safe, health and safety guidelines, being in this kind of outdoor structure of a parking center. And it doesn't allow for a kind of huge drive-in experience that we've been seeing in theaters, like ENO has been doing this recently, and I've been hearing more and more about the kind of drive-in opera, which I think sounds like so much fun. The parking center is much smaller than that and is divided over 7 levels. So I did start to think about an experience of a piece that would be divided over those 7 levels, and could involve within it a sense of an ascent, that you are moving up and up and up and up and up. And that might sound contradictory to anyone who knows Twilight of the Gods, because it's often a lot about going down, 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 and like going into the descending, really, rather than ascending. But I actually think that I chose Twilight of the Gods for 2 reasons. One of them was really thinking about Christine Goerke, the soprano who's playing Brunhilde, because she loves MOT, she loves Detroit, and we have gotten to be friends, and she said that she would love to consider doing a project together. So I did start thinking, okay, well, the world's reigning Brunhilde, why would we want anything less than Brunhilde, as part of it. But then, instead of choosing Valkyrie, which is an opera I really love, and Siegfried, which is so problematic but wonderful and complicated, Twilight of the Gods was the part of the ring that I actually had the hardest time with. I liked it the least, because I don't know why it never really spoke to me until this present moment. Yeah. And starting to, going through everything that we've gone through as a society, Twilight of the Gods suddenly spoke to me with incredible immediacy when I started thinking about it, because it's ultimately the story of, we've been following through the whole ring cycle, a world order that is built on corruption and thievery, and knowing that the alternative to that is a path of love. And those 2 forces are in conflict right from the beginning. And over the course of the ring, that conflict gets bigger and bigger, and even worse, it has gone through multiple generations now of getting more and more intense, and getting to a point where there's less and less ability for the various different strands of the universe of the ring to communicate or to find any sense of synthesis. So the only thing left for it to do is to unravel completely. And it is not, one of the things that I think is so wonderful about Twilight of the Gods is it's not the hero that we thought was going to win, was going to solve everything. He ultimately is revealed to be a kind of puppet, who has no will of his own. The person with the true will of her own is Brunhilde. And that this powerful woman can pick up the mantle of the person we all expect to be the hero, because he's blonde and blue-eyed and muscular and all of these things, yeah, he's not the hero, he is not the person who's going to save the day. Instead, it's going to be the woman who all along had love at the core of her being. That she was going to be the one to actually administer the death blow to this corrupt old world order, and that becomes something that she does she even does that with love. She even sings as she knows that she's tearing down her father's palace. She's burning down her father's palace, but she does it to bring peace to her father, because what he has created was always built on a faulty foundation and was never ever going to work. Was the only thing to do is to tear it down. And I just keep thinking that is a message that is so useful for us to hear right now, as we go through this, torturous time, not just because of the pandemic, but because of all of the social ills that have also been plaguing this country for generations, just like in the ring. It's generation after generation, and we've come to a point where people that have followed one ideology for so long can't even imagine another way of thinking. And that goes beyond party lines. That is in both directions. There's this inability to bridge a conversation. Right. Well, the notion that we can't, the minute we can no longer connect with the moment we can no longer connect with people who think differently than us, who have a different, upbringing, who have dealt with different traumas, historical traumas, the minute there's no longer an ability for that communication to happen, then our society really is lost. And
Yeah.
we're at that point in our society where the danger is really high. And I do think it's up to art to figure out how we can create experiences where a shared experience of a performance can offer that opportunity for us all to collectively experience something that we can have different political points of view, we can have different ideologies, and yet we can, through art, I hope, find this way to still realize where we stand in solidarity with each other.
Yeah.
And so that's, for me, it's been a very motivating factor to make this piece happen, even under these insane circumstances of a pandemic. And people from all over, and doing a lot of preparation and a lot of conversations on Zoom, and as opposed to what we're used to. But that's what creativity urges us to do. It urges us to not be afraid, of the obstacles that are put in front of us, but instead to realize that there is unexpected potential everywhere, even with obstacles.
Yeah.
And in that case, creating a work now, creating a performance now, has with it, I hope, that inspirational, an aspirational aspect of looking. We don't have to go into the opera house, in these maybe kind of more ordinary, mundane structures like a parking center. We can unlock potential. We can unlock our own human potential, and I think that is something that I hope can carry us forward into a more just society.
Yeah. And I'm wary of the kind of platitudes like, opera will save us all, right? But I also am really struck by the way in which, the way we've been kind of talking about how opera offers this kind of heterogeneity as a genre. And I'm thinking of people like David Levine, who talk about opera as this unsettled kind of genre, thinking about how opera as a genre kind of brings together multiple elements that are often in conflict with one another, even in the performance itself, and how there's a lot of power in that kind of presentation of synthesis, even with a kind of disarray, or our new favorite word, heterogeneity, kind of beneath it all. It's really exciting. And the parking garage itself, maybe even becoming one of those signifiers of the different levels of understanding and cooperation that maybe we're working together to reach.
Yeah, I hope so. And also, this is a project that I'm really approaching in a way that's very similar to the work that I've done with the industry, where I know I'm the driving force, but that doesn't mean it's purely my perspective on this work. Every single person who's involved with this, my goal with any project I ever do is I want every single person to recognize themselves in the work that we create, that they're not following my, I'll have the overall view, that synthesizes everybody, but I don't really, I'm not asking people to just follow my perspective. In fact, like, my goal is really to invite people to open up my perspective, and show me something about this work that I don't even see in it, and that has happened every step of the way already with this, by bringing great artists together. And, why would you bring great artists together just to have them just to be, puppets in your little puppet show? Like, I think some people, that's the way that they work best. And I, applaud them for that. And it's not a judgment call about that way of creating, but I just know myself that the work that I've done, the best work that I've ever done, has been the one that's left the most room for all of my collaborators to change, adapt, to take my ideas, to move them way forward, or remix them, make it make sense for them. sometimes just go, I love that idea, I'll follow that. But, but not in any way that's a blind, kind of a blind following of that's what the director said, like that's,
Mhm.
it's like that is a mentality that for me doesn't make for great art, like, oh, I'm doing this because the director said so, or I'm doing this because the conductor said so, in a similar way, it's like,
Mhm.
okay, no, I've come to terms with this and I've seen that they're right here, but they then also need to have that kind of dialogic mindset of saying, okay, but here was something important for me that has also made it in and has expanded this work. So in the
Yeah.
case of Twilight Gods, we have, the whole text, the whole story is rewritten, by a Detroit-based poet named Marcia Music. And she has done a ton of research on The Ring and on the story, and has tried to figure out what is exactly the right aesthetic version of this, of a kind of spoken word poetry
Yeah.
that makes sure that anyone who, you don't have to have seen The Ring 10 times to understand what we're going to do. So you get the context of the audience, I think, that opens it up to any audience member. But more importantly, we get to see it from the point of view of somebody who, has, as a lifelong Detroiter,
Yes.
is going to bring with her an enormous amount of individual perspective. And I hope what that does is actually invite the audience to realize there are so many ways to experience this one work, including Marcia's perspective,
Exactly.
and I mean, the way that we worked on that was, giving her my ideas of what we could talk about, giving her just some parameters, laying out the whole scheme for it, and pointing her to places where she could do some research, but that she took on completely and did on her own. And
Yeah.
she decided for herself that she wanted it to be rhymed couplets because of the way that the Wagnerian text kind of works,
Mhm.
and the way that it makes it more mythic. So she discovered a lot for herself, and has really made it her own in a way that I hope she would say, oh, I would publish this as a book of my own poetry, regardless of this project,
Yeah.
And that's what I would wish for every single person connected to this project, from Christine to Marcia to each of the Rhine maidens to everybody.
Hmm. That's so exciting. I guess I'm thinking about now maybe shifting to thinking about some of the experiences of, you kind of already started to allude to it, what spectators will experience. And I'm curious, maybe you could talk a little bit about, from your perspective, how do you think being in a car, listening
Yeah.
within a car might change how an audience member participates in an opera as a spectator?
It'll change everything, and in a way that's part of the experience that I'm so excited about, because let's see what that's like, it's gonna be a huge part of the rehearsal process.
Yeah.
um, the car aspect, of course, is a very easy way to keep everybody safe, so it allows us to really create a performance that does not put anyone in danger, really.
Exactly.
The audience, will stay in their car, and they'll hear the music, the live music, and Marcia's pre-recorded poetry on their FM radio. And so on every level, there's an FM station, and so
Got
there is a participatory part of this, which is people have to change their dial as they move from station to station.
it.
But beyond that, I am very excited about the notion that, I'm excited about the notion that the opera gets to be experienced in this way that they've never heard it before, like through their FM radios, gives it this feeling of like my own everyday life has all of the tools that I need to make great art happen,
Yeah.
like the radio is something that, we might consider as background noise as we're trying to get from point A to point B. But what if we use that as a real tool, for a
Mhm.
true deep investigation, some important ideas, and gorgeous music and wonderful singers, So
Yeah.
thinking about that technology as something that enables an audience, to experience something more deeply. And the parking center for the Detroit Opera House is so great because actually it offers so many different perspectives. And so every single level has a different configuration of the cars and a different, different staging space, for each of these scenes. And it'll include projection, including projection on the building across the street, from the parking center. And, because it's so open, as you're driving around, you're also seeing the life of the city. So you're never, it's something similar in a way to what I did with Invisible Cities, with the industry, which took place at LA's Union Station. And the everyday life of that station and the architecture of that station was always present. And that actually made the opera richer. The same way that I talked about Purcell and Britten being in conversation with each other.
Yeah.
And very similarly, these operas become so much deeper the closer they are to our cities. The closer they are to our everyday lives. It doesn't bring them down off maybe it brings them down off a pedestal, but maybe that's a good thing. Maybe it lets us approach these things as malleable and open pieces, for which looking at the skyscrapers in downtown Detroit make us think about what has been built up in our own cities. What part of our city lives need this kind of dismantling, as we see Brunhilde doing for her dad's tower of Valhalla. So there's this notion that we don't escape, that opera doesn't offer an escape, but instead it offers us this ability to penetrate more deeply and to engage more deeply with our own very lives. Yeah. And I think the notion of being in your own car, being in your own, let's say, comfort zone, a comfortable, safe situation, the very same setting where you see all of the city, whiz by you, that windshield that you look through becomes a portal for something that you might have never expected before. And what I hope that can do for the audience, for looking at their world in a new way.
Yeah, so I like that, because it's like a way of, yes, you're in a comfortable space and safe, especially right now, that is secluded and distinctive, and yet that gives you a way to, rather than being separate from the world around you, to hopefully approach the world around you from a different perspective, and to work to penetrate the kinds of car walls of privilege that we also all inhabit, or in that way. I mean, I think that's really powerful, because I can see that maybe because opera also has, as you and I have spoken about before, this kind of really problematic history, this racially problematic, this classist history. It's associated with processes of coloniality, of imperialism, that kind of thing. It's even maybe more important to think about what it means to A, be an audience member who's secluded, and then B, even more important, what happens when you leave that space of seclusion and privilege. It's
a great point, and I think that I do think that's something I think about for the audience being in a privileged cocoon, of their own making, like regardless of what kind of car you're driving to see this piece, whether it's a, Rolls Royce, or whether it's a Chevy pickup truck, it's like,
I'll be probably in the pickup truck.
I know. I actually am wondering if any audience members would be in a pickup truck with a bunch of people in the back,
right?
Trying to listen to this piece. That might be tough. Anyway, they won't have as good of a view back there. So, well, we'll see. But anyway, I think that sense of a self-reflection is something I have been thinking about. Even in Visible Cities, the piece that took place in Union Station, as an operating train station, it meant that there were all kinds of people there. There were people catching trains, there were people eating lunch at the restaurant, and there were homeless people, and they all mixed. They weren't certainly, let's say, mixing among each other, but they were all present, in this space. And suddenly, the audience with these headphones is put in this position of both observing the world around them, maybe in a way that they're not used to, and probably more than usual, really thinking about this kind of privileged inside and outside perspective that this piece gave them. And I think that the only way to maybe unpack some of what is, I think, problematic about the way opera, I won't say about what's problematic about opera, I'll only say what's problematic about the way opera has been presented and institutionalized and
Yeah.
produced through the many years.
I buy that.
Like I don't think opera is like an inherently racist or colonialist art form, but do I think that there have been composers and librettists who have perpetuated racist stereotypes? Of course, there are so many of those. And then did that only get worse when the companies producing them didn't question it, or didn't try and figure out another way to do it, and instead merely reproduced that racism, maybe unwittingly, like I'm not saying that the organizations are purposefully racist, but by just doing it without thinking, they just perpetuate an ideology instead of, to use that word that we talked about earlier, instead of disrupting that ideology, and saying, okay, we're not going to do this the way it's always been done, and thereby giving these pieces a real chance. I think the standard repertoire has so much to say to us today.
Yes.
But it's also exactly the repertoire that is most in need of a kind of for lack of any better word, disruption.
Yeah, I agree.
And I think also in America, like why would we do these Italian and German and French pieces, without making it ours? Like we are performing it in America in 2020. We don't need to keep our allegiance to an old world, but we can learn about this. The way that we want them to learn about us,
Exactly. We can unpack it. We can kind of pull it apart and find ways to, I guess, question many of the mores and norms within these pieces.
These classic works of these colonialist powers, and think to our, I'd like to think to myself, what makes it really ours? It's not just the American operas that we're writing and presenting. That's really super important. But why wouldn't Bohème be different in Detroit? And certainly it should be different in Detroit than even elsewhere in America. But we're not doing the art form a service by making it beholden to standards that aren't ours.
So, Yuval, what kind of, I guess, surprises and exciting things should audiences maybe look for in this kind of a production? I guess in this way, I'm thinking about all the exciting things that site-specific work can offer an audience. I know we're doing some of the ideas for this production obviously came out of keeping everyone safe during the pandemic, but turning that on its head, what sorts of things should audiences kind of anticipate?
I hope that they don't anticipate anything. That would be the best approach, because I hope that's actually the approach people take to any opera they come to. Get rid of all of your expectations, get rid of all of your anticipations, and try and come as open as possible, and that is true, Megan. It's one of the real gifts of a site-specific project, because you are no longer in your traditional setup, where here is where we are as an audience and that's where the artists are, and there's a big gulf of the orchestra in between, and we have our ritual of how we attend these things, and with that ritual comes a lot of let's say a lack of investigation sometimes, because we get comfortable, and there's nothing wrong with comfort, but there's also a lot to be said about the unknown, and learning to love the unknown, and to appreciate the unknown. And so as soon as you're in an unexpected site, of course, it's easier because everything's different. You don't even understand the rules of engagement. How is this even supposed to work? And I would hope that audiences bring with them that kind of childlike, open-eyed excitement, And then, once we can go back into a theater, I am hoping that we can find ways in which we can capture exactly that kind of spirit, even when you're back in the ritual of going to your assigned seat and the curtain going up and the orchestra, all of those things, that we somehow cultivate in the audience that sense of a love of adventure. And so for that reason, I feel like this project is a perfect way to start my tenure at MOT.
Exactly. Oh my gosh, that's so exciting. Well, Yuval, thank you so much for this wonderful conversation. As always, our conversations kind of give me new ways to approach my world of scholarship and thinking about performance from that perspective. So I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you.